It's Labor Day weekend, 1968. Indianapolis Raceway Park is absolutely packed. The greatest drag race in the world is happening right now, and somewhere in that paddock, buried between the big haulers and the factory-back teams with their crew chiefs and their matching uniforms and their corporate checkbooks, there is one single man standing next to a lime green 1932 Ford 5-window coupe. No crew. No sponsor. No factory backing. Just a guy from Monroeville, Pennsylvania, who bought this car out of a junkyard for $400, built the engine himself, fabricated the transmission himself, tuned the car himself, and is about to drive it himself to one of the most celebrated wins in the entire history of the NHRA Nationals. And here's the thing that makes all of that even better. During every single time trial run that weekend, this man deliberately fouled. He red-lighted on purpose, every single pass, because he knew the old timing systems didn't display reaction times, and he was using those runs to silently calibrate his launch timing for when eliminations actually started. Nobody else figured that out. He just quietly sat there building his own advantage, while every other competitor was chasing fast time slip. That is the kind of thinker we are talking about today. A man who took a junkyard Ford, a small block Chevy and a garage behind a highway motel, and beat the entire field at Indianapolis. This is legacy motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about grassroots racing legends and the forgotten machines that should have been in every magazine ever printed. If you're someone who loves the raw, unfiltered history of American drag racing, the kind of story where one guy with grease under his fingernails outsmarts an entire sport, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today we are going deep on Harry Luzader, the classical gas 32 Ford, and one of the most remarkable privateer stories the drag strip world has ever produced. So let's go back to the very beginning. And when I say beginning, I mean a junkyard in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, sometime around 1958. A rusted 1932 Ford 5-window coupe is sitting there next to another derelict 32, and both of them are going absolutely nowhere fast. Harry's family owned the 22 motel at 3636 William Penn Highway. 40 units, right on the main drag east of Pittsburgh. His parents bought it in 1950, and it became the family business. And then Harry's father died while Harry was still a teenager. Suddenly this kid is helping his widowed mother run a motel while his friends are out doing whatever teenagers do in western Pennsylvania in the late 50s. His mother had a 6-bay garage built behind the property. Whether she knew what she was setting in motion with that decision is unclear, but those 6 bays became the nerve center of one of the most successful privateer drag racing operations on the entire East Coast for the next 2.5 decades. Before the 32 Ford, Harry and his brother had been wrenching on a 1938 Ford in a rented garage across town, doing what kids did back then, which was terrorizing the local street racing scene after dark on the highway. The passion for fast cars was already burning. What changed everything was that 32 Ford sitting in the junkyard that Harry could literally see from the family property. The junkyard caretaker was, by all accounts, an interesting character. The kind of person who is very attached to things that other people would consider absolute garbage. Getting that car loose took months of negotiations. But Harry eventually put $400 cash in that man's hand and pushed the Deuce home. It had a Model A 4-cylinder in it. A flathead 4, the cheaper engine the original owner had ordered back in 1932, and the caretaker had apparently driven it until it expired around 1958 and then just parked it. So Harry was starting with a completely dead stalker with roughly 26 years of accumulated neglect sitting on top of it. Now, you have to understand what a 1932 Ford meant in hot rod culture to fully appreciate why Harry even wanted this thing. The 1932 Ford is the foundational American hot rod. The Deuce. The Holy Grail, as people in that community literally call it. The proportions are right. The chassis is adaptable. The body style is absolutely iconic. By the late 50s and early 60s, if you were building a serious hot rod, there was a very strong chance it started life as a 32 Ford. When Harry looked at that junker through the chain-link fence, he was not just seeing a cheap car. He was seeing the thing. He got it finished and road-ready by 1962. The first engine was a 352-inch stroker small-block Chevy, where the crankshaft had been modified through welding to increase displacement and torque. But a welded crank is a time bomb. You know it will eventually let go. You just never know exactly when. Harry got connected to the right people early. A local machine shop owner named Don Balland did the precision machine work and introduced Harry to Dave Koffel, a legendary Ohio gas racer who genuinely understood how to make a Chevy run. Koffel's advice was blunt. The motor is fast, but do not push that welded crank too hard because it will let go. And sure enough, it eventually let go in spectacular fashion, destroying itself completely. Most people in that situation would have simply rebuilt the stroker and kept going. Harry went a completely different direction. And here is where the technical story gets really interesting, because the decision Harry made after losing that first engine is basically the foundation of everything that followed. Instead of building another big-inch stroker, he went small. Really small by gasser standards. He took a 283 cubic inch Chevy small block, which is a fairly humble piece of iron, and bored it 60 thousandths over to bring it out to 292 cubic inches. And then he topped it with a Hilborn fuel injection unit. Now, here is what most people don't realize about that choice. Hilborn injection was not supercharging, and that distinction matters enormously. The famous A-gas supercharged gassers, the ones everybody talks about when they mention the gasser wars, were running massive blown Chrysler Hemis and Chevy big blocks with belt-driven roots, superchargers stuffing air into engines displacing 427 cubic inches or more. Those cars were making somewhere in the range of 800 to 1,000 horsepower and running the quarter mile in the nines by the mid-60s. Harry's car was nowhere near that category and was never supposed to be. The Hilborn injector on a naturally aspirated engine is a mechanical fuel injection system that meters fuel very precisely based on throttle position and airflow. It is more efficient than carburetors at high RPM. It responds better under hard acceleration. But it is not forcing extra air into the engine the way a supercharger does. What it does is ensure fuel delivery is absolutely perfect all the time, which means you can run the engine harder and extract every last bit of power from whatever displacement you have. The real magic came from the valve train. Through his connection to Don Balland, Harry got introduced to Harvey Crane of Crane Cams down in Hallandale, Florida. Harvey Crane was a serious, respected figure in the cam grinding world and eventually an East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame member himself, which tells you something significant about the caliber of people inside Harry's network, even if his operation looked like a one-man band on the surface. Crane supplied a roller camshaft along with ported cylinder heads and a complete valve train package specifically designed to extract maximum power at very high RPM. That combination allowed the 292-inch engine to pull reliably to 8,900 revolutions per minute. And reliable is the critical word there, because a lot of engines can make big power for a handful of passes. But Harry was going to make thousands of passes over this car's career, and the engine had to survive every single one of them. The 4-speed transmission he built himself by hand in the garage behind the motel. And the reason I keep returning to that detail is because it keeps getting more impressive the longer you think about it. A 4-speed manual transmission is not a simple piece of machinery. The gear sets, the synchronizers, the shift forks, the case itself, everything has to be machined to close tolerances and assembled correctly or it grenades violently on a racetrack. Harry fabricated his own from scratch. So what you had in this lime green 32 Ford by the time it entered NHRA competition around 1963 was a completely hand-built race car. Every significant mechanical component had been built, assembled or personally modified by one person working in a 6-bay garage behind a family motel in suburban Pittsburgh. The car entered C-gas initially, which placed it in a class determined by total vehicle weight divided by engine displacement. C-gas in the mid-60s ran roughly 10.50 to 11.49 pounds per cubic inch. At 292 cubic inches, Harry's car had to weigh at least around 3,066 pounds to qualify. As the car accumulated winnings and Harry added ballast strategically over time, he eventually moved down to D-gas and later E-gas, where he found his greatest success in the pure gas class format. Then NHRA expanded its altered classifications and Harry moved to D-altered within Competition Eliminator, which operated under a completely different format where cars from different classes run against each other on a lapse time handicap. D-altered at 11 pounds per cubic inch meant the car was indexed at roughly 3,212 pounds. Competition Eliminator was where the Nationals title would eventually come from. Now, you might be thinking, look, this is just one guy at one regional track running a car most people have never heard of. But here is what most people don't realize. Harry's home track was Pittsburgh International Dragway, built on a former airport site in the Bridgeville area off Route 50. He also ran at Maple Grove in Pennsylvania, York US 30 Dragway, Englishtown in New Jersey, and Gainesville in Florida. And of course, Indianapolis. The car's reputation on the East Coast Division I circuit built steadily through the mid-60s. It won in C-gas. It won in Street Eliminator. It won in D-gas. And it had a signature that fans started recognizing immediately. The thing wheel stood. Not just off the line, but through every gear change, through the entire quarter mile. That lightweight front end on a drop tube axle with a chrome leaf spring setup, combined with all the weight biased hard toward the rear and the snappy power delivery of a high-revving small block, meant the car came up off its front wheels and stayed up. People started expecting it. Jim Hill, who later wrote the definitive piece on Harry's career, described it perfectly as a high-riding mint green Deuce 5-window tearing across the track, pulling the front wheels in every gear. That image stuck in people's heads permanently. By the time Harry added the polished aluminum front-mounted Moon fuel tank, which is a classic gasser styling element, the car had the complete visual package. Chrome straight axle up front, jacked nose high, a Moon tank gleaming in the sun, lime green body, and those front wheels coming up every single time the car launched. That combination was genuinely impossible to forget. Now let's talk about what was happening around Harry during this period, because context matters here in a way that changes everything about how you understand his achievement. When people talk about the gasser wars, they are mostly talking about the A-gas supercharged class. And they are mostly talking about Ohio George Montgomery, and Stone Woods and Coupe, and Big John Mazmanian. These are the names that ended up in the history books, and they deserve to be there, because those cars and those teams did something genuinely extraordinary. Ohio George won Little Eliminator at 3 consecutive NHRA Nationals from 1959 to 1961 in his powder blue 1933 Willis, and went on to win 4 total Eliminator titles at Indy over his career. Stone Woods and Coupe ran an integrated team out of Los Angeles with a 1941 Willis on a blown Chrysler Hemi and were voted the fans' favorite race car of all time in a 2008 NHRA poll. Big John Mazmanian put his candy red 1941 Willis into the nines for the first time at Bakersfield in March of 1964, running a 9.77, and that was a genuine landmark moment. These were touring professionals. They were backed by cam manufacturers. Isky sponsored Stone Woods and Coupe. Engel backed Mazmanian. The advertising wars between those companies fueled the on-track rivalries, and track promoters traveled to the NHRA Nationals specifically to sign match race contracts with these teams. They were running 6 to 10 match races per month, crisscrossing the country constantly. Harry Luzader was not any of that. Harry was competing in the middle-tier gas classes at NHRA Division I events against other serious but largely regional racers. The competitive fields in D-gas and E-gas were deep. The margins were small. Winning consistently there with a hand-built one-man program is genuinely difficult even when nobody is writing magazine features about it. The other thing worth understanding is that by the mid-60s, the 1932 Ford body was already carrying a disadvantage in the upper classes. The Willis Coupes, the 1933 and 1940-41 models, weighed between 1,500 and 1,800 pounds in race trim. The Ford Anglia was lighter still. The 32 Ford with its full steel body ran closer to 2,100 to 2,400 pounds, and its 106-inch wheelbase was longer than either the Willis or the Anglia, which affected weight transfer dynamics significantly. For the highest class competition, those differences mattered enormously. But in the middle classes where Harry was operating, the 32 Ford's iconic status and Harry's exceptional engine building kept things very, very competitive. And unlike the match race stars who were collecting real money from track promoters, Harry's entire program was funded by NHRA class winnings. Whatever the car earned at the track paid for the car to get to the next track. That financial discipline forced an efficiency that most teams with outside money never had to develop. By 1967 and 1968, Harry was running the 32 in de-altered under the competition eliminator format, and the comp eliminator bracket is where things get complicated in an interesting way. Competition eliminator takes cars from every altered and gas class across the entire program and runs them against each other using elapsed time handicaps based on each car's national record for its class. So Harry's 32 running de-altered might be bracketed against a car from B-altered or E-altered or any other class in the field. The Christmas tree gives the slower car a head start based on the difference in their class indexes. The fastest car does not necessarily win. The car that runs closest to its class index wins. This format rewards consistency and precision above raw speed. You have to know exactly what your car is going to run, and then you have to make it run exactly that. No more, no less. And the guy who had been building and tuning this engine by himself for 5 straight years had a very precise understanding of what his car was going to do on any given pass. At the 1968 NHRA Spring Nationals at Englishtown, Harry won Best Engineered Honors, an award that specifically recognizes the quality and sophistication of the mechanical package. Coming from a one-man operation, that recognition is a significant statement about what he had built. A period photograph shows the lime green 32 leaving hard against the Blackwood Herdkirk altered Anglia, which was a 426 Hemi-powered machine, with NHRA Chief Starter Buster Couch running the Christmas tree. The competition Harry was facing in eliminations was not soft. Then came Labor Day weekend in Indianapolis. The NHRA U.S. Nationals at Indianapolis Raceway Park was then and arguably still is the most important drag race in the entire country. It is the biggest field, the deepest competition, the most scrutiny. Winning anything at Indianapolis means something real. And Harry showed up alone with his 292-inch small block built on a machine stand in a 6-bay garage behind a motel on a Pennsylvania highway. And he started deliberately red lighting in time trials. Here is where it gets really interesting because this is genuinely one of the smartest pieces of racecraft you will ever hear described. The timing equipment at Indianapolis Raceway Park in 1968 did not display reaction times at the finish line or on-time slips the way modern systems do. Harry knew this going in. So he used his time trial passes not to chase a fast elapsed time but to calibrate his launch timing with complete precision. Every red light was a data point. How early was I exactly? What does that feel like physically? Adjust. Run again. Red light again. Adjust again. By the time eliminations began, he knew with absolute certainty what it felt like to get right on the green light and deliver it consistently under pressure. And he delivered right on green starts all the way through the bracket, all the way to the final. The final round of competition eliminator put Harry against Carl Kirk, who drove for the Blackwood Herd-Kirk team. Drag Racing Central's retrospective on the event noted it was a very popular win with the fans, and that Kirk did not make another final round in his career after losing this one. Competition Plus confirmed it in period reporting. A classic 32 Ford Deuce Coupe captured competition eliminator laurels, driven by Harry Luzader of Monroeville. The following year's official NHRA Nationals program listed him among the 1968 champions alongside Don Garlitz in Top Fuel and a handful of others across the eliminators. Harry Luzader. One man. A $400 Junkyard car. A Wally Trophy from Indianapolis. Over the full career of that 32 Ford from roughly 1963 to 1973, Harry accumulated over a dozen NHRA elapsed time and miles per hour class records in D-Gas and E-Gas. He took 17 national class win trophies. He won approximately a dozen Division I World Championship Series events. He led the Division I point standings for 4 consecutive years. The car made an estimated several thousand passes during that decade, which is an enormous number for any single race car, especially one being loaded on a trailer and driven to tracks across the entire eastern seaboard by its builder, driver, and tuner. One important thing I have to flag here, because this channel does not paper over gaps in the historical record. No source I could find anywhere lists specific elapsed times or trap speeds for Harry's car in any class configuration. The record clearly states he held over a dozen NHRA elapsed time and miles per hour class records, and I have absolutely no reason to doubt that. But nobody appears to have written down the actual numbers in any document that is publicly accessible today. The NHRA archives at their museum in Pomona would almost certainly have the actual class records from that era, and that is precisely where you would need to go to find them. If you dig those up, I genuinely want to know what they were. Leave it in the comments. Also worth addressing directly is the name Classical Gas. The definitive article about Harry's career on the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame website is titled Rust to Diamonds: The Long Journey of Harry Luzader's Classical Gas 32 Ford. That is where the name comes from. But whether Classical Gas was actually lettered on the body of the car or was simply the author Jim Hill's creative headline choice, I could not confirm from any photograph or source I found. Period photos of the car exist, and they show the lime green coupe in real detail, but the resolution and angles available online did not allow me to read any lettering definitively. So call it Classical Gas if you want, but I am hedging on whether that was the car's official name or simply a great article title. The end of the 32 Ford as a race car came in 1973, and it was a decision Harry later described as one he often regretted. By the early 70s, aerodynamics had become a serious competitive factor in gasser class competition. The NHRA rules had been evolving steadily, and the cars beating Harry in the altered classes were getting sleeker and more purpose-built. The 32 Ford, with its upright windshield and vertical body panels and essentially flat front face, was, as Jim Hill put it, a quarter-mile windjammer. Beautiful to look at and aerodynamically punishing at the speeds Harry was reaching. Adding ballast and running a smaller class could only compensate so much for a body style designed in 1932 with zero consideration for aerodynamic. So in 1973, Harry sold the car he had built and campaigned for a full decade to fund the construction of a 1969 Opel GT race car. The Opel GT is a significantly more aerodynamically efficient shape, and Harry put the same basic engine philosophy into it. A 292-inch injected small-block Chevy with a crane roller cam package. The Opel eventually pulled to 9,500 revolutions per minute with a fluid damper harmonic balancer added to protect the crankshaft. He raced that car in E-Gas and de-altered through modified eliminator and competition eliminator until 1981, when NHRA dropped modified eliminator entirely. He then continued in comp until around 1990, when the costs finally exceeded what he could sustain on a privateer budget. 9 years of NASCAR circle track racing also mixed into the later years before he fully stepped away from competition. In 1982, Harry and his wife Carol opened Luzader Auto Parts and Service at 274 Center Road in Monroeville in a former BP gas station. They ran that business together for 4 decades. A 2021 profile in Trib Live described Harry at 77, still working alongside Carol. They retired in early 2023. No obituary has been found as of the time this script was researched, which is genuinely good news, because it suggests Harry Luzader is still out there somewhere in Monroeville at roughly 81 or 82 years old. And that matters for reasons we are about to get into. In 2007, Ford Motor Company named Harry's 32 one of the 75 most significant 1932 Ford hot rods of all time as part of the Deuce's 75th anniversary celebration. A blue ribbon selection panel that included Jeff Beck, Greg Sharp, Pete Shapuris, and Jake Jacobs evaluated 474 nominees and chose 75. Harry's lime green competition eliminator winner from a Pennsylvania junkyard was one of them. Now, Jeff Beck, for anyone who does not immediately recognize that name in this context, was not simply a selector for a car show. Jeff Beck was one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived, and he was also a genuine, lifelong, deeply obsessive collector of 1932 Ford hot rod. He owned multiple Deuces. He commissioned custom builds. He was the kind of collector who did not just buy things. He understood them at a level most people never reach. And Jeff Beck wanted Harry Luzader's car. According to the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame piece, Beck offered substantial money for the 32 and was turned down flat. A commenter on Haggerty Media's tribute piece after Beck passed away in January 2023 also referenced attempts to acquire the car dating back years from multiple serious buyers. The current owner, whoever that person is, bought the car in 1973 when Harry sold it, converted it from a race car to a street rod, and as of the most recent reporting available, has remained completely firm in rejecting even extraordinary offers for its sale, including Beck. The East Coast Drag Times article closed on the car by suggesting it would probably remain with its current owner until after his passing. There is a thread on the HAMB forum titled, "Where is Harry Luzader's 32 Coupe?" where someone wrote, "I understand that someone out there has Harry Luzader's 32 Ford Gasser. I would love to see that car restored." That was written years ago. The answer has not emerged publicly since. So somewhere out there, a lime green 1932 Ford 5-window coupe is sitting in someone's private possession in a configuration we do not know, in a condition we do not know, and Jeff Beck never got to own it, and the rest of us simply have to sit with that. Also worth addressing directly is a claim that has circulated in local press. A Trib Live report described Harry as being in the National Hot Rod Association Hall of Fame, and that is not accurate based on anything I could find. He was inducted into the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame in October 2016, which is a legitimate and genuinely meaningful honor given how seriously that organization documents the history of East Coast drag racing. But the NHRA Motorsports Museum's International Drag Racing Hall of Fame in Pomona is a completely separate institution, and Harry's name does not appear on that list in any source I found. The local newspaper reporter almost certainly saw the ECDT induction and conflated the two organizations. Do not repeat the NHRA Hall of Fame claim. The exhibit for the 75th anniversary 32 Ford show premiered at the January 2007 Grand National Roadster Show in Pomona, and the car was profiled in the official publication titled 32 Ford Deuce, the official 75th anniversary edition by Tony Thacker. That means Harry's lime green competition eliminator winner from Monroeville, Pennsylvania, is documented in the same volume as some of the most celebrated custom hot rods in the entire history of American automotive culture. The East Coast Drag Times article points this out with a certain quiet amusement. That honor came even though the car had always been powered by a small block Chevrolet. A Chevy-powered car on Ford's official list of the 75 most significant 1932 Ford. Ford picked Harry's car. That is genuinely funny and also absolutely correct, because the significance of a 32 Ford hot rod has nothing to do with what engine is inside it and everything to do with what the car means and what it achieved. Here is the bigger picture that I want to leave you with, because Harry Luzader's story sits inside a much larger story about what happened to the entire gasser class, and that arc is worth understanding properly. The gasser wars peaked somewhere around 1963 to 1966. The cars were getting faster, the rivalries were getting hotter, the match race circuit was generating real income, and fans were filling the grandstands to watch blown Willis Coupes and Anglias do things that seemed physically impossible for street-bodied American cars. It was a genuine golden era. But the funny car was coming. The factory experimental programs from 1965 and 1966 had produced altered wheelbase super stock cars that Ford and Chrysler factory teams were campaigning hard, and those morphed quickly into flip-top fiberglass-bodied machines running on nitromethane that made the gassers look slow and quiet by comparison. Ohio George Montgomery abandoned his 33 Willis for a tube chassis Mustang in 1967. Stone Woods and Cook left for Top Fuel funny car the same year. Mazmanian followed in 1968. NHRA allowed tube frame chassis in the gas classes around 1968 and started permitting late-model body styles in gasser rules in 1967. And once you could run a late-model body on a tube frame, the visual distinctiveness of the classic gassers dissolved completely. They just looked like slow funny cars. The class was gone in all but name by 1970. NHRA formally eliminated the gas classes by 1972. Modified Eliminator absorbed the survivors and then got eliminated itself after 1981. Harry navigated all of that by adapting. He moved from gas to altered, then built the Opel to stay competitive as the rules shifted around him, and kept racing until 1990 when money finally ran out. That is 25-plus years in competitive drag racing, starting from zero with no outside money, no factory support, and no crew. That is an extraordinary run by any measure. And the reason people are still searching for that car online today, still posting on forums asking where it went, is not simply because it is a legendary 32 Ford that won at Indianapolis and carries a Jeff Beck story. It is because Harry Luzader's car represents something that the famous gasser cars never quite captured. It represents the middle. The vast, uncelebrated middle of the drag racing world where the cameras did not usually point, where magazine features did not usually run, where match race promoters were not signing contracts. The hundreds and eventually thousands of racers who built their cars in home garages, funded their programs with class winnings, and showed up at regional tracks week after week competing for wins that the national publications might mention in a results column if space permitted. The fact that one of those cars, produced by one of those racers, beat the entire field at Indianapolis on pure preparation, craftsmanship, and an insight about reaction time practice that nobody else in that paddock had thought of, is a story that every grassroots racer of every generation immediately recognizes. You have seen the version of Harry Luzader at your local track. You might be the version of Harry Luzader at your local track. The guy with the one-car operation and the hand-built engine who shows up consistently and occasionally beats people spending 10 times what he spends. The difference with Harry is that he did it at Indy in 1968. The car he did it with was a $400 Junkyard 32 Ford. The engine was a 292-inch small block. He built himself in a garage behind a motel on a Pennsylvania highway. That is not a metaphor for anything. That is literally what happened. Harry Luzader drove that mint green Deuce through eliminations at the U.S. Nationals, delivering launches timed with a precision he had quietly engineered for himself over an entire week of deliberate red lights, and he brought home the Wally. And somewhere out there that car still exists. Street Rod now. Different configuration. Owner who is not selling. Jeff Beck wanted it and could not get it. Jeff Beck is gone now and the car is still wherever it is. And Harry Luzader is presumably still in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, at somewhere around 81 or 82 years old. One man. One car. $400. And a Wally from Indianapolis. That is the story of Harry Luzader and the classical gas 32 Ford. If this kind of deep dive racing history is what you come here for, subscribe, because there are a lot more stories exactly like this one buried in the record, and we are just getting started.